Good afternoon and good evening. Some are in Europe, so it is evening. I am Mary Hunt, the co-director of WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm here in the WATER office with the other co-director, Diane New, who will wave, and our summer staff colleague, Brooke Andrews of the University of Maryland, accompanied by another summer regular, Catherine Hunt New, from a senior at Gwinnett Mercy University. They happen to have been high school classmates, which we didn't realize until Brooke joined us, and now they're both seniors in college, which is wonderful, and both working here in the office this summer. We also welcome Patrice Rupp, who is our who is our other colleague here at WATER. She is from the University of Heidelberg, and she is with us for a year through a German volunteer program as part of the Church of the Brethren volunteer program. And she joins us remotely from vacation, the poor soul. So we're happy to have Patrice with us as well. And she will be joining us, Shay Hunt New, this evening with her parents who are visiting from Germany and her brother. And we're going to be a typical American family producing a typical American dinner. So we're looking forward to your being with us. I'll just give a hint. It will start with shooters of melon cucumber soup. So anybody who wants to join us in the area, just come on over. It is our privilege today to invite Emilie Towns, Stacy Floyd-Thomas, Angela Gise Johnson, Alison Gise Johnson and Angela Sims, who are the editors of a wonderful new book, Walking Through the Valley, Womanist Explorations in the Spirit of Katie Geneva Cannon. WATER welcomes you and thanks you at the outset for this important book. What I predict will be simply an early contribution to a steady stream of scholarship and activism related to the signal contributions of the late Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon. Let us begin, as we always do here at WATER, with the land acknowledgement. We at WATER are on the indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland, that is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward indigenous people that is deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. WATER's work is aimed to bring about social justice. So consider Native people and others, especially those who are racial ethnic minorities, on whose land you sit. And let us take a moment of silence to honor them. Thank you. I have one brief announcement before we start, and that is a happy one, that today in Mexico at the Autonomous University, there is a celebration of the inauguration of the chair of Sylvia Marcos. And those of you in the field of feminist studies and religion know Sylvia Marcos. It is a chair, Sylvia Marcos, Feminisms, Mesoamerican Epistemology, and Spirituality, Double Legacy. And so as we gather here through WATER, dear friends and colleagues in Mexico are joining with Dr. Sylvia Marcos. I have taken the liberty of sending our warmest wishes from this gathering to Dr. Marcos, a longtime friend and colleague in feminist studies and religion. We sent a letter which will be read at the festivities, and we congratulate Sylvia on her many accomplishments, always focused on the empowerment of those persons who are marginalized. So that's another happening today, which is really exciting. And La Cátedra del Feminismo, Epistemología Mesoamericana y Espiritualidad, Doble Legado, Double Legacy, the chair of Sylvia Marcos. How exciting is that?
That's great.
WATER's work brings feminist, womanist, spiritual values and intellectual work to efforts at social change. That's what we do. Hence the choice of this volume, which I am shamelessly hawking for the afternoon. It is available through Westminster John Knox Press. It is a 2023 publication. I urge you to get it. The choice of this was obvious. I know that this conversation will inform many people, and through all of those gathered, others will learn about this book as we socialize its rich resources of womanist work. I noted earlier, before some of you joined, that we here in the WATER office are sporting the art of Katie Cannon. It is, as you know, she was a doodler, and her doodles became jewelry, and the sides of swag bags and other things, and all of us are sporting. Show us, girls, your Katie Cannon pins, and Catherine is wearing the one that honors Presbyterian women, and Diane and Brooke and I are wearing the doodles. So let us know how deeply connected we are today in the celebration with Dr. Katie Cannon. I have personally taken the liberty of adding pearls to my outfit, as Kate always laughed when I wore pearls. I told her I did so for special occasions, and this is one. Let me begin by saying what our format will be. I will introduce our speakers. They will have collectively about 25 minutes to introduce us to the volume at hand, and then we will all engage in discussion. Please listen and enjoy. We will take notes, which will be on our website shortly, along with the video of this session, and you're welcome to use this video for purposes of your own and those of your colleagues. And we hope you will use this video and introduce people to this work. I ask you once again, please mute your audio, except for the speakers, to cut down on noise and assure a clear line for the presentation. When our speakers finish, you can join the conversation with instructions that will be given then on how to do so. We always end promptly at the top of the hour to respect everyone's schedule. You can re-listen or point other people in the direction of this teleconference by going to our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences, and in 4 or 5 days, we'll have that video up for your use. That means you don't have to kill yourself taking notes. If you want to have your lunch or your early dinner, please go ahead. We will keep the Zoom line open after we finish at 2 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time for those who wish to have conversation a bit after 2 o'clock. However, the official session ends then, the recording ends then, and we will thank our speakers. Of course, they are more than welcome to stay on, but I know they are busy people with schedules of their own, so we do not have any expectation of them to be with us longer, but we are deeply committed to keeping our agenda simple and straightforward. Let me begin with my introduction then. The only thing better than welcoming this esteemed group of editors would be to have the Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon with us in person. Alas, her untimely death in 2018 prevents that from happening. But I have every confidence that she is with us in some form as her person and her work animate our conversations. Katie Cannon was a force of nature. As poet Nikki Finney said in her foreword to the present volume, again, Walking Through the Valley with a foreword by the poet Nikki Finney, I quote, Katie Cannon never just invited anyone anywhere. When Katie Cannon called, you were being sent for. And a caravan of deep listeners, mighty thinkers, and joyful toe-tapping folks were always there, waiting. Friends, we are those people today, waiting to hear from our speakers who bring us their own wisdom, as well as the wisdom of Dr. Cannon. I can affirm what the poet said, having been summoned more than once. I first met Kate at Union Theological Seminary in the early 1970s when she was a doctoral student there in Hebrew Bible. And the night I met her, she was the disc jockey or the DJ for a party there. Life got better for me after that meeting. Fast forward to 2018, the founding conference of what is now the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership in Richmond, Virginia. I, along with a few other white and Asian colleagues, received a save the date note from Katie herself. When Katie Cannon asked you to save the date, you saved the date. As a white woman, I am always respectful of Black women's space, so I wasn't sure about attending. But I figured my name wasn't a typo on her list. I consider it one of the privileges of my life to have been present at the extraordinary inaugural conference entitled Bearing Witness to Womanism, What Was, What Is, and What Shall Be, keynoted by Alice Walker. 1,500 people gathered on the first evening, and several hundred of us spent the next day learning, celebrating, being amazed. Don't miss in this book Melanie Jones' chapter entitled The House That Cannon Built and the Hinges Upon Which the Future Swings. Melanie Jones is the first director of the center that was brought into being that weekend. I was summoned 2 days after the conference ended. The email read, "Good morning, Mary and Diane. I thank you for being among the crowd of witnesses during the launching of the Center for Womanist Leadership. As I continue, you know whose voice this is Dr. Cannon, as I continue to digest how visions, ideas, and words became embodied reality this past weekend, I'm writing to request you, Mary, to request you to write a freestyle essay of your experience I can use in ongoing promotional materials. And Diane, I request you to send me any liturgical verses or prayers inspired by your participation in the weekend's mountaintop experience. Needless to say, I sat right down and did as requested. Her response to my article a couple days later is vintage Katie Cannon, and I quote her again. "This is brilliant. You are included among the living testimonies informing my new self-assignment to craft the doctrine of incarnation from a womanist perspective. The excellent quality of your reflection is inspiring me to do the happy dance on my good foot." As I wrote in my own remembrance of Dr. Cannon, alas, we will not read that work from her hand, though there's a dissertation in it for someone, that incarnation. However, we know what womanist incarnation looks like at the podium, in the classroom, in the pulpit, and indeed on the dance floor in the person of Katie Geneva Cannon. Today, her memory is a blessing. So we turn to the present volume. I will now introduce the editors and leave it in their capable hands. I will mention only the most salient details of their CVs because reading the whole of them would fill the hour. We begin with Dr. Emilie M. Towns, highly regarded writer and professor. She just retired after a celebrated tenure as Dean of Vanderbilt Divinity School, where she's also Distinguished Professor of Womanist Ethics and Society, Gender and Sexuality Studies. She has begun a well-deserved sabbatical and will return to teaching anon. In 2024, she'll be president of the Society of Christian Ethics, having already been president of the American Academy of Religion and of the Society for the Study of Black Religion. I actually would like to see her run for president of the US, but her sabbatical may prevent that until 2028. Welcome, Dr. Towns. She will be followed by she will not be followed by Dr. Stacy Floyd-Thomas, who is in absentia today. She is in Japan and emailed me this morning that despite her best efforts, she couldn't join us, but she's the second editor here of the volume. And Dr. Stacy Floyd-Thomas was Katie Cannon's first graduate student. And she is the Carpenter Professor at Vanderbilt Divinity School, also a well-published scholar focusing on womanist ethics. She's the past president of the Society of Race, Ethnicity, and Religion. And we regret that she cannot be with us, but she assured me that her colleagues had this session well in hand. So we greet her in absentia. Our second speaker will be Dr. Alison Gise Johnson, Associate Professor at Clafton University in South Carolina. She's the co-author with Vanessa Monroe of Exodus Women, Volume 1, Securing the Sacred. Dr. Johnson is also the author of the essay, Fulfilling Katie's Deepest Desire, part of a series of remembrances in the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion in 2019, after the untimely death of Dr. Cannon. And a deep bow of thanks to you, Dr. Johnson, for your interview in the Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion with Katie in 2018, entitled Dancing Redemption Song, Across Generations, an interview with Katie Geneva Cannon. Thank you for getting that done. And our third in-person guest will be another editor of this volume, Dr. Angela Sims, who is president of Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School in Rochester, New York. She wrote a book called Lynched, The Power of Money in a Culture of Terror, and co-edited with Katie and Emilie, Womanist Theological Ethics, a Reader. Dr. Sims is a graduate of Trinity College here in Washington, a wonderful place that I love. And she has an MDiv from Howard University School of Divinity, also a bus ride from this office. Her doctorate is from Union Presbyterian Seminary with a dissertation on Ida B. Wells. She's now the first woman president of Colgate Rochester Crozier and is an ordained Baptist minister. We welcome you, Dr. Sims. So I am thrilled that you're with us, and I look forward to your presentations. We are in your capable hands for the next 25 minutes. Thank you to Emilie, to Stacy in absentia, to Alison, and to Angela for gracing our Zoom today. Walking Through the Valley, Womanist Explorations in the Spirit of Katie Geneva Cannon, published by Westminster John Knox Press, 2023. Dr. Towns.
I've been thinking through how to begin, and I think that I want to start by saying that there are some good things that come out of a pandemic, and this book is one of them. We had the good sense not to try to make ourselves get this book out on a timeline that was based on a time that is no more. And I think it made it a better volume. one of the things that struck me as I was working on it was how much this was both an act of love and an act of grieving. I talked to Katie many times during the week, and she even responds from time to time. And one of the things that I think she taught all of us was the importance of presence, of being there for folks, of listening to them, of coaxing out the best in them. And so we tried to think through how does that look like in a book, or what does that look like in a book? And for me, at least, it became how we structured the book. And so rather than the four of us sitting down and writing essays and doing God knows what else, we came up with the format of taking a theme that was important to us from Katie's work, and then inviting two other folks, in some cases three, to think with us about that theme and to then write essays based on that theme, hopefully taking the kernel of Katie's thought and doing what she always wanted us to do. Let it grow, let it expand, let us come up with new ideas and insights, and realize that true learning, which was her great love, it wasn't just teaching, it was the learning that came along with it. It never ends if you're wise. So for me, it was both a labor of love and a labor of mourning. And then we got around to the scholarship last. Angela or Alison, the floor is yours.
Yes. I put it this way in terms of labor of love and mourning, to at once be able to hold both grief and gratitude at the same time. And so I was grateful when Dr. Emilie invited us and convened us to birth a work that looked like it might be one of Katie's children. And so just a little bit of my background. I was a chemical engineer before entering into theological education. And so I have been a very analytical person, though I love poetry also. So I went to Temple University, not knowing the process of how to work on a PhD in theological education, and met Dr. Cannon. And I literally followed her around after every class. I stalked her. Because I knew that she would give me a vocabulary to help me name myself. Part of that vocabulary really kind of centers on just watching her and her skill and with analysis. And so as an engineer, I fell in love with her analytical approach to liberation. There was one mind map, because Dr. Cannon used mind maps typically for everything. And the one that I fell in love with was the theoethical trajectory of Christian imperialism. I just think is the most wonderful mind map ever created. My undergraduate students, however, do not agree. It causes much pain. But what I realized was that Dr. Katie G used that as framework for writing her essay on Oliver C. Cox and Katie's Canon. And so the second section of the book really kind of uses that essay as catalysts for understanding the depths of poverty that Black women experience. Though Dr. Cannon was from a rural space, I'm from Chicago, and so I looked at it in terms of Black women living in poverty in urban areas. And then the kind of spirituality that is required to birth what I've kind of entitled as communal sovereignty. And so there's the economic part of poverty, basically seeing poverty as a commodity, and then unearthing the spirituality of Black women that helps us to navigate and actually create sacred spaces in spite of the commodification of poverty. And then finally, that part of the section, which is the second chapter in that section, is written with Vanessa Walker, and we talked about excavating darkness. And we use the term darkness based on Audre Lorde's understanding of the rich, deep darkness of Black women's spirituality and souls. And so there's this celebration of what is rich and Black and dark. And Vanessa and I use that framework, use that lens to write a soliloquy called Learning to Release, based on the biblical woman Yocheved or Jochebed. And I've fallen in love with that work too. And then finally, in our section, Faith Harris talks about eco-womanism. And so larger scope, what I did was I juxtaposed this supplantation of the theoethics of Christian imperialism with a view of Black sovereignty as a way forward, wherein sovereignty is achieved through reclaiming a communal understanding of survival, inclusive of womanist spirituality, and grounded in what Bell Hooks entitled The Wild Spirit of Unspoiled Nature, whose fundamental gift is cherishing freedom by embracing the organic rights of the earth. And so my hope is that Dr. Katie G would be proud of us doing the work our souls must have, and that nurtures and invests in the survival of the whole community, the whole human community and creation also. So, Dr. Angela?
So Dr. Alison P., I'm about to cry on this screen. I came to know Dr. Cannon. It's one thing to read a person's work. It's another to get to know a person and to have that person get to know you. But I came to know her by way of Alison P. Gise Johnson. I was enrolled in a Doctor of Ministry program at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union, and Dr. Alison P. Gise Johnson was assigned as my advisor. And the first day when I encountered Dr. Alison P. in an elevator, it's like, I know this person. I have seen her before. And I saw Dr. Alison P. November 2005, Orlando, Florida. She was giving her first presentation at the American Academy of Religion. She was Dr. Cannon's student. And Dr. Alison P., a few weeks into my program, pulled me aside and said, you know how to write. You will not have a choice in your electives. You are to go down to Union Presbyterian Seminary and you are to take courses with Katie Geneva Cannon. I was not aware that Dr. Cannon had relocated from Temple to Union Presbyterian Seminary, and the rest is history. I became a student not only of Dr. Alison P. Gise Johnson, but a student of Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon. Both of them shepherded my work. Dr. Cannon chaired my dissertation committee. Dr. Alison P. Gise Johnson was an external reviewer and member of my committee. When Dr. Cannon was on sabbatical for a year, I had a key to our office with express instructions that I was to be in that office at a certain time every Wednesday of every week with no excuse to provide a progress on my research. But I was also to meet with Dr. Alison P. Gise Johnson at least once a week to make sure that any questions that I had, any issues that I was encountering would be addressed in the moment and not to be delayed waiting for Dr. Cannon to return from sabbatical. One of the things I most appreciate about the way in which Dr. Cannon, I'm gonna have to say shows up, because she still shows up this way for me, shows up in the classroom and in any space that she occupies, is the way she brings her full sense of who she is into a space, being unapologetic about who she is, about her family of origin, about the experiences that she encountered. And so to hear Dr. Cannon talk about family and the ways in which that shaped the trajectory, not only of her research and her scholarship, but of her teaching and her preaching, is extremely formational in my own life. Because what Cannon asks us to do, again, drawing on her own experience as a PhD student in Hebrew Bible, the ways in which she took the processes of excavation and applied them to social ethics, and the ways in which she encouraged students to dig deep and to unearth that which gives meaning and significance to life, is not something that can be minimized. It is often not a skill or an approach that is encouraged in the spaces of higher learning. But Dr. Cannon knew how to take tools from one area of study, one discipline, and apply it to another in such a way that students were able to adapt and apply them in their own research, teaching, and scholarship. In part 3 of the book, Womanist Ways of Leading, what is not expressly articulated are 3 womanist virtues that Dr. Cannon articulated in her ongoing work in the life and the writing and the research of Zora Neale Hurston. And those 3 womanist virtues, quiet grace, unshouted courage, and unctionist, really capture the essence of what it means for individuals who really self-identify as womanist religious scholars. The ways in which we occupy spaces and navigate spaces, the ways in which we are committed to being truth tellers, and the ways in which we express courage and bravery in spite of. And so when I think about Dr. Cannon's experience as a young girl in relationship with one of her beloved aunts, who happened to be employed in the home of some white folks, and recognizing that her aunt had to continue to work even as hot grease was splattered on her face, really informed the ways in which Dr. Cannon says that even when one's face is on fire, we are still called to do the work. We don't ignore the pain, we don't ignore the source of the pain, and we continue to do the work of dismantling systems that seek to dehumanize other individuals. Each of my co-authors in part 3 really takes seriously the ways in which Dr. Cannon embodied a commitment to seeing not only the published works of Black women, but the lived experiences of Black women as sources for moral and ethical engagement. And so to both Paula Parker, who worked alongside of Dr. Cannon, and whose D.Min thesis from San Francisco Theological Seminary, Dr. Cannon chaired, as well as Ikea Smith-Robert, who is a recent graduate of Claremont Theological Seminary. Our participation in this volume also signals Dr. Cannon's commitment to intergenerational mentoring and co-learning. Every student who entered Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon's classroom was seen as a co-learner. Everyone brings something to the learning enterprise and endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emilie, Alison, Angela. Thank you so very much for those opening words. We thank you, and I think the genealogy is becoming clear to us, that there's a genealogy here, those descendant of Dr. Cannon, as it were. And I appreciate your laying that out for us and showing us how that works. And I'm quite convinced that the volume and all that's in it does resemble her in a very deep and beautiful way. I also excuse anyone who sheds a tear today, because it is a time to think so fondly of her, and also to express our deepest gratitude to you for channeling her work in this very profound way. So do not beg our apology for tears. They are part of the watering of her work today, and I share my own. So thank you to the editors. Let us turn now to conversation, and I would invite those who wish to speak to do so. We will use as you know, the reaction button at the right hand of the bottom of your screen. You will use the raise hand function if you can. Just do what I'm doing, which is to raise your hand, and notice that once you do that, we who are trying to moderate will see you at the top of the queue. You're welcome to state your name, perhaps where you're from, and if you could keep your question or comment brief, we could hear from lots of people. We're more than 40 gathered, so I'm sure there are a number of people who have things they want to say, and I can assure you that we had at least 35 other registrations of people who will be watching. I'm sure they registered knowing they couldn't be here, but we'll be watching this as time goes on, and we will have the full recording of this session. So keep your comments brief, but please enjoy the time together and make them. I have a list of, I only have 9 questions of my own, but I'm going to hold back a little bit and allow other people to get started, and then I'll raise mine as time allows. So the floor is open. Who will be first?
Mary, I'm going to start because I grabbed this, which I should have had at the very beginning. These are Katie's doodles, and some of these are on our pins. And this is signed by Katie, KG Cannon 2015, at one of her gatherings. I'm not even sure which one it is, but the inspiration of Katie as we share in our conversation. Enjoy.
Thanks, Diane. The floor is open. Be not hesitant. If you have trouble with the button, just wave your right front paw and we'll acknowledge you that way. Rosemary Ganley, Peterborough, Ontario, go ahead.
Good afternoon, evening, everyone. I just want to share how privileged I feel to have been in on this discussion. When I first saw the topic, I thought that has very little to do with me. But with the power of these presenters, I think it has everything to do with me. I just want to tell you about an event yesterday. I think most of our cities, well, the Canadian original sin has been the oppression of Indigenous people. And yes, and our cities have almost all have encampments now of the homeless, the poor, the addicted, the confused. And my small city has such an encampment. It's a block large with tents, and in Canadian winters, that's pretty awful. But on Friday night, there was a murder of a resident, and the next day there was a suicide in sympathy. And so a few leaders in that community organized a service, a memorial service yesterday. I came home so dispirited. Mind you, it was an indigenous, half the people there were middle class and half were residents of the tent encampment. And we started with smudging and drumming. And the only reference to traditional religions was one speaker spoke about Cain and Abel and who is my sister, and do you know where your brother is? But when I looked at the situation there, the garbage, the tents, the lack of lavatories, I came home dispirited. And I just wonder if you have any comment, but for me, this experience has been quite healing. And we come from such different worlds.
Thank you, Rosemary. I feel an article coming on one of your weekly columns in the Peterborough paper. I think you have something important to say here. I don't know if any of our guests would like to address the comment that you've made, because it certainly dovetails with a lot of the issues in the book.
Well, I think for me, at least, one of the things that comes to mind is something I learned from Katie. I think I met Katie in the early, I met her in the early 1980s when she shamed me into going back to school to get a PhD. And it was the power of hope, that no matter how bad things are, our responsibility is to hold on to that hope and to continue to work to make it better. For me, at least, I even take it a little further and say, despair is a luxury we no longer have in this day and age. And if I learned anything from Katie's work, it's you have to keep your hand to the plow, you have to keep working, and don't do it as an individual, do it with others, because there is power in the community.
Thank
I
you.
think if you don't mind, I think the other thing is those that are unhoused are the miner's canary, to help us know that has been institutionalized in a way that bans the supplantation of imperialist values, right? And part of our response to poverty is pre-designed, and that is charity. So I find it very special that half of the people are those, for this vigil, half of the people are the residents of this community, which happens to be, an encampment. And the other half are middle-class people. The people in the encampment do not have the luxury of advocacy. But the fact that both those populations are together, there is this bond that can be created so that the middle class start to really interrogate how they became middle class, right? And to also advocate with those that are on the street. And I found it special that no quote unquote traditional religions were articulated, because it has been the traditional religions that have made us blind to the struggles of one another. So I want to thank you for that sharing of that moment, because it invites us, Dr. Cannon's mind maps, really analyzed oppression, But what I found in trying to teach my students is that if there's any link that is disrupted, then that circle of oppression gets disrupted. And so I think we're all capable of lifting the burden of confinement and what I call circumscribed poverty.
Thank you very much. Let's see, Sheila Curran, would you like to take over now from Dublin?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the people that spoke and outlined the rich content of the book. I suppose in Ireland, I'm in Ireland, and I mean, I was 5 years in Chicago, and I had the privilege of once hearing Katie Cannon. And I suppose the American experience of womanist, liberationist theologies and biblical interpretation, which I had spent years in Latin America, in Peru, where it was another format of liberationist theology born out of experience as well, is just that what you talk about Christian imperialism and voices and experience is so lacking in this side of the world. And that unity of voices on all those themes of exclusion, especially for women of color, of varied experiences in the migration field today across our world, who come with very disturbing experiences about how we are in our world. And in other faith traditions, as well as the Christian tradition, about how we can combine our energies and voices, that it doesn't become just the voice of one particular cultural experience in a Western context, but how those bridges are built so that the freedom and the mind maps that you speak about, the struggle for dismantling structures that are inbuilt in our global world, while their expression is very much in a different context, depending where you are. But I yearn for that way of building more bridges and building more ways of tackling the globalization of these issues, and how those unity of voices become the stronger sense in the global world for the hope and the good that we need. Because just where I am in Ireland, it's a very sad place theologically, no matter where you come from, but it's particularly sad for those minority voices. But I just really love, because when you give people access to the kind of stuff that Mary and Diane and Water do, or to these kind of resources, it's so hard to get them here. And it's so hard for people to hear those voices, because that gives people the chance to speak from their experience as well, and the courage and hope that they need. But thank
Thanks,
you
Sheila.
all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing that perspective to us. Anyone wish to comment?
Just very briefly, Sheila, as I listen to you voice your concern, I think back to Mary's introduction to today's conversation and the ways in which she provided an example of how Katie Cannon reached across race, reached across areas of research, reached across generations to form community. I would encourage you to think about the ways in which your very presence in this conversation and other conversations that are hosted by Water become an opportunity for you to extend an invitation across different areas where there appears to be silence, to invite persons into conversation.
Very helpful, very helpful. Dr. Towns, did you want to comment, or are you just stretching your leg or your arm up there? Stretching your arm. Monica Maher from Quito, Ecuador. Go right ahead, my dear.
Thank you so much to Water for sponsoring this, and to Emilie and Angela and Alison. It was so moving to hear you to just feel the strength of your conviction and the love for Katie Cannon, and also the love between all of you. I guess what strikes me, before reading the book is just the method. Like Emilie said, that it was a labor of love and mourning. And it was like a way to form community, build more community, and grieve together and celebrate. So that I'm really taking that with me. That's a big takeaway of the method itself is the message, and also how much you were talking about Dr. Katie Cannon's pedagogies of the co-learning and just all the mentoring. And I think in the academic world where there's such an emphasis on individual achievement and success, that it's just wonderful to hear you and how you all, the three of you, came today, and that there's a real sense of the collective wisdom. So I wanted to thank you, and also ask, or just, I guess, state too, how important the book is for the Americas, like if it could be translated into Spanish and Portuguese, and I would love to work on finding publishers in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And editors, listen up. Monica may have some good context here that they don't call us the Alliance for nothing. There may be some ways to put some of this together in Spanish that would at least get especially some of the essays that are most salient for people in Spanish and Portuguese speaking countries. That's a great idea. Any editors, any movement on your end? And in Westminster John Knox Press doing anything about that?
We hadn't talked about it. So that is a topic to talk about. So we'll put our heads together and see.
Well, I would say that Monica Maher was just channeling Katie Cannon, who has now summoned you. So that might be something to think about. Give that some thought.
Monica's also one of my former PhD students, so I know her ways well.
Not only that, she was the first water intern, just so you know, Dr. Towns. Before you even imagined her, she was in the water office almost 40 years ago.
Wow.
Came third grade to the water office, and we welcomed her warmly. And then she went on to her studies, and now is almost a walking parliament of the world's religions in her in the UCC minister and part of the Grail, and a Buddhist practitioner, and among other things, doing peace work based in Ecuador. So we're grateful to have her. There was an Annie Finch who had her there. Annie, are you still wanting to speak?
Hi, sure. I'm very happy to be here and really enjoyed the discussion. I don't have the book, so forgive me if this is if it's covered in the book and I should know already, but I'm curious just to learn more about womanism and maybe how womanism evolved, and whether there are thoughts about the current situation in feminism and how the relation between womanism and feminism and how that might have changed between the original beginning of womanism and now.
How many months do you have for that answer?
That's one of the more complicated questions we would get today.
Yeah.
But I'll start and ask Angela and Alison to jump in. Well, let me first ask, how much do you know about womanism? Let's start there.
I guess through Alice Walker, just a little bit, and my understanding,
Okay.
It's well, I mean, I have my own take on it. I'm not sure how accurate this is. I'm curious what you would think. My sense is that it's about that it's sort of it's thinking that obviously it started from Black women, so maybe it's partly about that. But my feeling is there's more to it than that, and than race, and it might also be about that feminism is more about buying into the system of equality of patriarchy, but womanism is more about celebrating what women actually are, and maybe the more matriarchal values and the more traditional strength that makes women strong in our own right, not just by trying to act like patriarchal men.
Dr. Towns, do you want to give a pithy answer, and then I'll make sure that Annie gets bibliography and materials to really get a sense of the Womanism 101 and go from there on a future occasion, because that's awfully big question for the time we have left. So
I'll start
yeah.
historically. It begins with Alice Walker's four-part definition in Search of Our Mother's Gardens, in which her editor wanted to know what the subtitle, Womanist Prose, meant. So Walker sat down and wrote this four-part definition, not thinking that scholars and academics and church women of all sorts would pick it up. And what it is based on is part one, the ways in which older Black women pass on information and survival skills or not to younger Black women. The second part talks about the diversity of the community of Blackness, Black folk, in terms of race and gender and color and sex and sexuality, and that it is a many splendored thing. It's not just one monolithic Blackness. The third definition looks very carefully at the ways in which the alleged standards of beauty for women never fit Black women and don't fit many other women for that matter. And then the fourth definition is a critique in which Walker says womanist is to feminist as purple is the lavender.
Lavender, I remember that. Yep.
Yeah, and so it's a critique of feminism. But what happened when this definition came out, Katie was among 2 or 3 other PhD students at Union Seminary in New York, and they said, you know, this may help us do our work. And what emerged is a method of doing whatever academic discipline you're involved in. With Katie, it was ethics. And if you read the first chapter in the book, you will see her journey there, which was painful. She began in Hebrew Bible and was not allowed to go as far as she could. So she switched to Christian ethics. Dolores Williams is another voice that she was in theology, as was Jacqueline Grant, also in theology. And they decided as they worked with it, saw that 3 things were constants back then: race, class, and sex or sexism. And that womanists thought at bare minimum needed to incorporate those 3 things in whatever theological or ethical reflection that was done. And that just began to spread into other disciplines in the theological academy. And then it began to be applied also in local churches, where women were starting to take their leadership in churches that had shut them out for so many years, but they were doing all the work. So that is part of it. It's wanting to be clear that Black theology was not enough, feminist theology was not enough, and what Black women saw and lived every day of their lives was this matrix that has since widened itself to a considerable degree.
Thank you very much. And Annie, I mean it, I will get you bibliography, and this conversation will continue in another forum, but you've just had a master class. So be grateful you got up this morning. Who will be next? I'll just pick one of my own here. Katie Cannon was an outstanding teacher, as attested to by her winning several awards, including the American Academy of Religion Excellence in Teaching Award in 2011. But that wasn't enough. Upon her untimely death, it has now and henceforth will be known as the Katie Geneva Cannon Excellence in Teaching Award, since she set the bar high. I wonder if people would like to comment, especially our editors, what is it that you take and what can we take from her pedagogy to improve our own? What do you get from her pedagogy? some of it's been mentioned, but I think in specific, what do you get? And how does it affect you in the classroom and in your being the dean or the president? Or because I think administration is an area that some of you have been pioneers in and really excellent at. I just wonder, what are those couple of those little clues that you take from her?
Well, for me, Dr. Cannon modeled active listening
Mhm.
with an expectation that individuals came to class prepared, not to regurgitate, but to engage in deep thinking, as well as themselves to learn the practice of deep listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, her assumption was that everyone that was present was a scholar. And she gave us tools to excavate our expertise, so that there was no mimicking. You know, you can't cheat in any of Dr. Cannon's classes, you know, but there were these tools that were given, first of all, to be able to claim your own voice. Secondly, to be able to navigate resources, including writings that were never intended for any of us to read, right? So she just simplified some of the most complex research simply by giving us 4 questions that we had to focus on while reading, you know, this matter. And I think finally, the strength and power of her pedagogy that is the bridge to her legacy, was that work always helped you to see your own work, right? Whether you were an undergraduate or a graduate student, the way she crafted her courses was that the final grade was whether you could see your own work, and particularly your work that would liberate your community from whatever community you were from.
Thank you.
Well, I think Angela captured it for me in my latest role as administrator since 2008. The deep listening is priceless in the classroom as an administrator, and to not only listen, but to hear what people are saying and push them into clarity, so that they can appreciate what they're saying and how they're saying it, and then invite the rest of us into a conversation.
Well, I have the unhappy task of closing the official meeting here on that note, Emilie, with thanks to you and to Alison and to Angela for really not only channeling Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon, but bringing your own wisdom and showing how her legacy is playing out in the womanist community. And therefore, we are in your debt, who are not in the community, but who are adjacent, who are womanist adjacent, as I like to think of myself. And I will simply say this was an hour I looked forward to with a certain dread because of the pain of her loss, and with a great enthusiasm because of the extraordinary power of her legacy. Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon Presente, and especially Presente in this book, which I hope people will now run and get a copy of, Walking Through the Valley. That was Psalm 93, I believe, Emilie, you brought it up. And it is Womanist Explorations in the Spirit of Katie Geneva Cannon, Westminster John Knox Press, 2023. Get it, use it, share it, spread the word. The audio recording of this session will be on our website at www.waterwomensalliance.org, along with notes that we will compile. And I want to simply mention 3 upcoming water programs for those who are interested. One will be a meditation on Monday night, 7:30, and Patricia Rupp, who is with us, will be offering a very short commentary on a bold journey of self-love. And we will meditate for 22 minutes collectively on a bold journey of self-love. Patrice, we look forward to it. And then on the 20th, Tuesday the 20th, Diane New and the water community at 7:30 as well will be celebrating the summer solstice, and we look forward to that as well. And then we're not sure whether we're going to move right into programs in July or whether we're going to take a 2-month hiatus until September, but we'll let you know. Whatever we do next, it'll be a tea with Rosemary Ganley about living a feminist life. And so it will either be this July or it will be in September, and Rosemary and I have to get our heads together on the date, but I'm hoping it will be next month. So we'll get that word out. I want to simply mention in conclusion that water programs are free. They're open to everyone. Your donations to water are needed and welcome. And what we try to do, as we did today, was socialize resources so that those who can donate, whether their time or money, do so that we can always make water programs available to everyone without charge. In the 40 years of water, we have learned that if we share, and I'm going to repeat that, if we share among us, there's enough.
Mm.
The if we share is the key thing. And 3 of our esteemed colleagues shared today, and among us, there's enough. So I want to thank Emilie and Alison and Angela and Stacy in absentia for a moving and informative session on the work and the life of Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon of blessed memory. Thank you all. Good day and good evening. I will now close the official session, and the Zoom will remain open for those who wish to chat. Thank you again, and have a great day. There's some interesting pieces in the chat as well, if you want to look at that. And wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you. The floor is open. Go right ahead. Anyone? Comment? Nancy Crody, what a pleasure to see you. What a vision before my eyes. Nancy Crody from Philadelphia.
I go back to the days when Katie was at Union still, so
That's right.
definitely miss her there and at Temple.
Yes, exactly. And good to have you with us.
Yep.
And Mark Primavesi, I'm happy to have you here with us. Mark's wife, Anne Primavesi, was one of the early ecofeminist theologians of our time. And Mark joins us for many of these conversations. Wonderful to have you. And I see her picture prominently displayed next to you. So that's terrific. Monica, we enjoyed your presentation last month on the Indigenous women in Ecuador with whom you're working, and I was particularly struck by the Indigenous medical school that they're developing, which was really amazing.
Thank you. It was great to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, you knew Dr. Cannon, of course.
Yeah, I mean that what you showed, Diane, that doodle, that page where she signed it, I think that was from the Feminist Liberation Theology meeting at the American Academy of Religion, wasn't it? Because I was
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
sitting next to her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's right.
Exactly right. Yeah.
It was on the arts. Yeah.
And you'll remember those who were in Richmond for the inaugural conference that the doodles of Dr. Cannon were on the side of the bag that we got. Remember that?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Mary, we're waiting for your other 8 questions.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just going to tee one up if that's really what you want.
Why don't you just name them all so that we can?
No, I'm not going to name them all, but I'm going to just tee one up because I have these experts I don't always have with me. One of them has to do with, it's really kind of a combined question. And that is your book included not only the scholarship, and as you said, Emilie, prior to that, the biography, but I wonder what Katie would be working on now, because she died before George Floyd and Breonna in 2020 and Breonna Taylor in 2020, just to name a few people killed by police brutality. What do you imagine she'd be putting her energies into? So that's one part of my question. The other part comes from Nakia Roberts' essay in this book, which I found really very, very powerful. I happened to be in Oakland over the weekend, and I went to the Oakland Museum where there's a new exhibit on Angela Davis. And Angela Davis claims that racism will not be eradicated until prisons are abolished. And I just wonder, putting those two things together, what womanist social ethicists among those here present think about A, what Katie would be doing, and B, about this abolition of prisons, so that we can weave this insight into our strategies, our analysis and strategizing moving forward. Those are really that's sort of the joint question I have. What would Katie be doing since she died before the real focus now that is undimmed on police brutality? And what would she be doing in terms of abolition of prisons, a la Angela Davis? Another little small area to cover.
Mm.
The book she was actually researching was a deeper look at the transatlantic slave trade. That was the next book that she wanted to write.
Okay.
So which births the whole idea of criminality and poverty. So her approach was to get at the root of a problem, and that would be the transatlantic slave trade.
Has someone
that's
picked up that
certainly-
manuscript, and are they working on it? Or is it not
Beg
that
pardon?
developed? Did someone pick up the manuscript already, and are they working on it, or is it simply in an unfinished state, or just?
Her family gave me a notebook that I just had the courage to look at about a year ago, maybe less than a year ago. And it was just a collection of some of her thoughts. It didn't have full form yet. But it was something that she often talked about. But she had some sources and questions she wanted to ask as part of her process.
Thank
And,
you.
Alison, that project really aligns with the work she began in that Cox essay and getting to the root of the economics of poverty, as well as the work that she did. Alison, remind me of the name of the woman in Florida who was arrested for murdering the physician after years of abuse.
Margaret. It wasn't Margaret Garner, was it? No. What was her name?
I know who you mean, and I can't call her name.
Google her. Google knows everything.
But all of that suggests that Dr. Cannon really had her hand on the pulse of this nation's infatuation with racism. And that while moral problems may have changed in scope over the course of one generation to the next, she understood the root cause of what caused all of those problems.
Ruby McCullum.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's it.
The image I had when you asked the question, Mary, was just Katie embracing the mothers, embracing whomever, and listening, that deep listening that you all were have talked about, which is so much hers. And then challenging. How do we make this different? How do we, these aren't Katie's words or my words, do justice, but what Katie would say to that.
I have another question. Pardon me, go ahead.
I was going to say, the other project that she really wanted her dissertation to center on was the desegregation of schools and what happened to the Black teachers, and not only what happened to the Black students, but what happened to the Black teachers who were sent to white schools and were made to do bus duty and lunchroom duty, and were not allowed to teach. But Bev said, that's sociologist work. And so, but she has notes, on her thoughts on that particular topic too.
I also had, I don't want to use my questions. If anybody has another one that they would like to Anybody who hasn't spoken would like to offer a comment or question, please go ahead. If not, I'll ask this. For those of you who know her biography so well, I wondered how her ministry took shape. In other words, when she preached regularly at the beginning of her career. Remember, there was one of you wrote about that she went off to preach at a particular church on the weekends. But she saw academia as the locus of her ministry. But for those of you who know her very well, were there other forms of ministry, especially in later years outside of the academy, where her scholarly work, which informed her scholarly work? Were there places she went? I mean, her life experience. I mean, I've been to Kannapolis. I've seen where she's from, and her mother, a grand woman, and that would inform but I just wonder if there were later things that you saw in her ministry that she engaged in beyond the academy or dovetailing with the academy that shaped her as well.
I think what she did in local churches, both in Philadelphia and in Richmond, Virginia, she created Bible studies. And so that part of her life where she was really in love with the Hebrew Bible and wasn't able to continue her studies, she translated that into resources for local churches.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I also think the way that the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership, the way it was designed not only for the convening of scholars, but for the convening of Black women in ministry, right? And so there really was no separation for her. Church was the academy, and academy was church, and all of them were grounded in community.
Alison, can you speak to the work that Dr. Cannon did leading up to the 2018 conference, as that was not her first conference, but it was the first conference that aligned with what we now know as the center?
Mm-hmm.
Cannon was in bed.
Yeah.
She had kicked herself back to life for a part of it. But before all of that, she convened Black women from different spaces, and that's articulated in Dr. Melanie's chapter. But I think before that, she didn't think she was an administrator. So she had conferences, but she couldn't see herself as the executive director of a center.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just talking one day, and I said, everything you've done for the conferences you've convened, for the Womanist consultation, the way you handle class, I said, you are an administrator. I said, you just have to find the way to be that based on who you are. Mm-hmm. Right. And so she convened undergraduates, graduate students, scholars, and then, we really had a great facilitator in the person of Sharon Watson Fluker. And truly, Dr. Cannon was at home. But so the foundation of the center, I think because each of us had a part of who Dr. Cannon is and was, we were able to put that in the center of the table. And so the center looks like her. It's just sanctuary. It's free space. It's going to be different every year. She wasn't trying to create something that worshiped her. She was just trying to create safe and sacred spaces, first of all, for Black women, and then for those who had the courage to love Black women in work.
Yeah, administrators, when I think about administrators, I think of people who get things done. And I mean, there are a lot of other components of being a good administrator, but bottom line, they get things done, and she got things done. Michael Marshall, you will be next. Welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hunt. I am a second-year seminarian in the Master of Divinities at CRCDS, and this past semester I had the privilege and honor of taking Womanist Theology and Practice with Dr. Cassandra King. So I just wanted to say, before I sign off, to Dr. Sims, Dr. Townsend, Dr. Johnson, thank you for your work. Thank you for continuing the tradition, and it has been the most informative aspect of my theological learning, womanist theology. And I take to heart the whole spirit of disruption, because clearly we need to be disrupted. And I always like to say to my sisters of color and marginalized beings that we owe you a great gratitude and a great debt for the work that you have done in perseverance and maintaining humanity. So as I sign off, I just want to say thank you and be blessed.
Thank you for joining us, and blessings on your ministry. And we know where you're studying, and we know what that means. So it can only be good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A couple of weeks before Katie died, my spouse Laurel and I stopped by the hospital to see her on our way from Massachusetts back to Tennessee. And we thought it would be a half-hour visit. And it turned into 3 hours. And we ran the gamut. We talked about people. We updated her about people. It wasn't gossip. We were just sharing information. And then near the end, she basically said, "You're going to have to pull this book together." And so when I could, it took a bit before I got in touch first with Angela and Alison, because Alison was Katie's rock steady at the end. It still cuts me. And I do wish she were here. I would be curious to see what commentary she would have about the recent presidential announcement this week. But one of the things I don't think we communicated was the joy Katie lived her life with. I mean, I have never laughed so hard as I have laughed when Katie started telling a story and she knew she had you, and she would keep going and going. And I literally fell out of a chair laughing at her story of going to, she went to Israel, but the storefront Black and Latinx professor, clergy she went with, went to the Holy Land. And there was just two different experiences going on from those two different perspectives for the same trip. But I do want to say that consummate storyteller, and one of my friends, my mother actually liked. So that was something. That was something.
Yeah. You pegged that right. I mean, this was not someone who had a, what would I say? Who had a capacity. This is someone who had a capacity for joy despite everything that she experienced and everything that she understood, which sometimes is even worse than what she experienced. She understood. But God, she was fun. I can still see her sitting there as the DJ, and I can say that must have been in the I think it was 73. That's because that's when she was doing the Hebrew Bible. She was still in the Hebrew Bible department at that point. Wouldn't that be 73? Alison, about right about there, when she, because that was one of the greatest tragedies in my I shouldn't say that. It was one of the greatest rip-offs of American theological education when she was put out of that program at Union. One of the great rip-offs of theological education. And it wasn't just Bev Harrison, but other of the professors there who made sure that, that she stayed and look at the contribution in social ethics, but imagine the contribution in Hebrew Bible had she stayed on in that. She would have had a double thing going on there.
Yeah.
It's really, and it was so helpful to put it in the book because some of us remember it and what it felt like when that happened to her, but others will learn from that in a deep way.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was a little worried that Westminster wouldn't publish it, but they said nothing.
Yeah, they had nothing to say.
And I'm like, okay, we're keeping it.
That's right. That's right.
It wasn't a lie. So
No, and I like the fact that names and pay numbers were mentioned because these things happen with real people who do them, and let it be a lesson to those who follow them that their reputations will continue.
Katie used to say, man's rejection is God's protection. And her thing was, there's no need in chasing cars and barking at the moon. In other words, her experience could have been a little different, doing Hebrew Bible than ethics. And we're not sure how she may have come out on the other side, but she may have been on her own poor baby list. She had a poor baby list.
I'm sure she did. I have a last question, then I will certainly let you go, and you've been more than generous in spending time with us here at Water. What's in the pipeline in terms of thesis or dissertations or those unpublished essays that got mentioned? I would imagine there are many students and scholars who are finding her work crucial for the crying needs of our day. And how will both that work continue in terms of what remains from her work and then your own work? Where are you going with all this? And that's really a question for the center. I had hoped that Melanie Jones might join us. I'm sure she's a very busy person, and I so appreciated her essay. I think it's one of the central essays in the volume. But I'm just wondering, what's in the pipeline? What's in the cottage industry called, Katie's canon? Anything we should be watching for, and something, even your own work as it's being influenced, continues to be influenced?
that's a good question. I'm just getting back into scholarship. I realize that
You mean you're not going to run in 28? Now, come on. I was going to make the announcement. Come on.
not even, I have too much sense to do something crazy like that.
All right.
Unlike some other people we know. But I see what my PhD students are doing. They are using her work as a launching pad, but my sense is that it might be too soon, that she's a living memory, and people are a bit hesitant, it feels like, and I don't know, I think Angela and Alison may have a better sense of it, but they're a little too hesitant to really take on her work in the fullness that it demands. And Katie would be the first person to say, I could have gotten something wrong, or I missed something. So she wasn't like that, but I don't think our students believe us when we say that. And so it's very gingerly handled. But they'll go after each other with no problem. So.
Projects in mind.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Angela.
So, Emilie, I think you're right, but I also think that part of the reasons the timing might not be yet is that given Dr. Cannon's own emphasis on non-scribal sources, and the way in which she herself left a body of non-scribal sources. So those doodles are not only in pens, but they're in postcards. And I think between Alison and myself, we may have 2 complete sets of the postcards themselves that lend themselves to a different type of interpretation, that are not apart from, but that are complementary to the body of writing that she left. I also think that because Dr. Cannon was a straight no shooter, I am not certain that enough students really have, and I'll call it a luxury of sitting with questions as they are progressing through coursework, as they are thinking about the focus and scope of their dissertations, not having the privilege to just sit with the questions does not necessarily give them the adequate preparation to engage with her work at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where the center can also come in. But to your point, Angela, I was just thinking about the part of Katie that is artist. What would it mean to convene some of the artists? You know, perhaps coffee table book of her feeling pictures, you know, just to also give space for the artist, you know, because with her feeling pictures, she felt like she was convening heaven and earth. It wasn't, you know, just colors and lines, but, you know, to be able to carve out space for those that are typically marginalized, and that is the artist. And I especially appreciated Emilie's chapter in the book. You know, that just, man, she had all kind of crayons and stuff going there. I mean, so just to really be free, you know, and sometimes you need that person ahead of you that says that all of us need to find our art.
Folks, I have to go.
Yes, I'm about to close us off here with the deepest thanks to the 3 of you and to Stacy, Floyd-Thomas in absentia, and most of all to herself, to the Reverend Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon, who enriched our lives in ways that we are only beginning now to appreciate as deeply as we can. And so you have made this a wonderful water experience, and we will make sure that it is socialized widely. And let us go with her close to our hearts. Where is she here? Let us go with her close to our hearts. And great good wishes to all of you on your endeavors, and deep, deep gratitude. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye all.
Take care, Mark. Be well.